"Please stay, Mama," said the small boy climbing into the departing bride's coach. The morning she left, Eli was already up on the wheel. He didn't ask permission. That's what I remember first, not the coach pulling through the gate, not the sound of Clara Dietrich's trunk hitting the floorboards, not any of it. What I remember is turning around from the water trough and seeing my boy, 6 years old, both hands on the iron wheel spoke, one boot already hooked into the hub, hauling himself up the side of that coach like he was boarding a train he had every right to be on. He wasn't crying yet, that came later. What he said stopped Clara mid-step. She had one foot on the iron step and her traveling bag in her left hand and her hat pinned on crooked, the way it always went crooked when she did it herself, and she turned back at the sound of his voice. "Please stay, Mama." He said it plain, not a plea the way a child works himself into, none of that red-faced bargaining, just a statement of what he needed, the same way he'd tell me the horse needed water or the lamp was running low. Eli had always talked like that, like the world owed him the truth and he'd return the courtesy. Clara stood on that iron step for a long moment. Her bag dropped back to her side. "I want to tell you I said something then. Something that bridged it, that opened the door I'd kept shut for 4 months. But I didn't." I stood by the trough with my hands dripping, and I watched my boy say what I couldn't, and I didn't say a word. Clara Dietrich had come to us in April on the Cheyenne stage. 31 years old, a letter in her pocket from my advertisement in the Wyoming Territorial Gazette, a carpet bag with a broken latch that she'd wound twice around with twine, and the most precise handshake I'd ever gotten from a woman. Firm. One pump. Business. She was a German carpenter's daughter from Cincinnati. Her mother was 2 years dead, her father's shop had gone under in the bank panic, and she had 3 younger brothers she'd been feeding since she was 17. She wasn't coming to Wyoming for romance. I knew that. I wasn't offering it. My wife Ruth had been gone 3 winters, and I was running a 160-acre cattle operation alone, with a 6-year-old and a hired man with a bad knee. And I needed another pair of competent hands more than I needed anything else in the world. That's what I told myself. She stepped off the stage, looked at me once, looked at the wagon, looked at the country past the stage depot, that long view west where the land goes flat and then crinkles up into the Laramie Range, and said, "You wrote that you had a working dairy operation." "A milk cow and 2 heifers," I said. "It's working." She looked at me again, and she might have smiled just at the corner. She got in the wagon. We were married on a Thursday, 9 days after she arrived, in the office of the county clerk in Rawlins because the circuit preacher wasn't due for 3 weeks, and there were calves coming and neither of us had the time to wait. Clara wore her second-best dress, blue-gray wool, and I wore my good hat. Eli wore what he always wore because I'd forgotten to tell him it was a special occasion. It wasn't a beginning of anything, is what I want you to understand. It was an arrangement. She'd run the house and help where needed in the operation. I'd give her a home, a wage, and by the terms of the legal arrangement, a share of the property if it dissolved after 2 years. It was put in writing. We both signed it. She had her own room, the room that had been Ruth's sewing room, and she set it up in one day and closed the door, and that was that. The first week she reorganized the kitchen. I came in from the morning feed to find every pot, every dry good, every tool on a nail or a hook in a different place, arranged by a logic I couldn't identify. The flour was where the salt had been. The cast iron was on the left side instead of the right. The kindling was outside the back door instead of in the wood box. I didn't say anything. The coffee was already made and it was the right strength, which Ruth's never had been if I'm being honest. The second week she found the ledger. I don't know what I expected. She looked at 3 years of my numbers and didn't flinch and asked 2 questions. What we were paying for the hay we were buying in, and what we were getting per head at the Rawlins sale. She wrote down what she wanted to say before she said it, which was a habit she'd carried from somewhere, maybe from her father's shop. the practice of not speaking until the thought was fully formed. "You're buying too much hay," she said, "because you're running too many cattle for the water you have. If you cut the herd by 30%, you'll get through winter without buying any, and you'll get more per head in the fall sale because they'll be in better condition." I stood there. "You can disagree with me," she said. "I'm not disagreeing," I said. "I'm thinking about it." She nodded and went back to the ledger. She was right. I cut the herd. I didn't tell her I thought she was right, but she knew because I did it. Eli took to her like I'd never seen him take to anyone. That surprised me. He'd been a quiet kid since Ruth died, one of those children who goes watchful when the world changes on them. He watched everything, the horses, the hands, me especially, like he was reading something in every small movement. I didn't know what he concluded. He didn't say. With Clara, he was different inside a week. It started with the bread. She baked every Tuesday and Friday, and she let him measure the flour because she said he was old enough and she wasn't going to pretend otherwise. He'd climb up on the stool and she'd hand him the scoop and tell him how many. And she didn't talk to him the way adults talk to children, that high, soft voice, that cushioned distance. She talked to him like she talked to me. Even, direct, no padding. He loved it. By June, he was following her to the garden in the mornings before I was even out of the barn. I'd come around the side of the house and see them both crouched in the bean rows, her talking, him listening, her showing him something with her hands, and I'd stand there a minute before they saw me. I'm not going to dress it up. I watched. I stood at the corner of my own house and watched my boy with a woman who wasn't his mother, and I didn't know what to do with what I felt. I kept a distance that probably looked like coldness. It wasn't coldness exactly. It was something else. Fear of the wrong word, maybe. Fear of letting something in that I'd spent 3 years learning to live without. Ruth and I had been together since we were 19, married at 21, built this place from a claim and a borrowed wagon and $300 she'd saved from teaching. She died of a fever in November, quick and wrong, and I had Eli and the cattle and the winter coming, and I just worked. That's the whole of it. I worked until I was too tired to feel anything, and I did that for 3 winters, and it became the only way I knew to be. Clara didn't push. Whatever she thought of the arrangement, she kept it to herself. She was efficient and even-tempered and occasionally precise in a way that cut, when she felt the precision was warranted. She had opinions about how things should be done, and she stated them once and didn't repeat herself. If I followed her suggestion, she moved on. If I didn't, she moved on and was right about it later, silently. We were careful around each other. You could feel it, the way you feel a current in water before you step in. Neither of us was willing to cross to a different kind of ground, but we were both aware of where the line was. I noticed things I had no business noticing. The way she tied her hair back before she started anything, a work habit, automatic, she did it the same way every time. The sound she made when she read something in the newspaper that surprised her, a short exhale, somewhere between amusement and exasperation. Her hands, they were a working woman's hands, strong, the knuckles a little large from years of whatever Cincinnati had asked of her, and she moved them with a precision that was almost its own language. I noticed. I didn't say anything. We had a signed arrangement and I was going to honor it. The trouble started in late July. It started small, the way the worst things do, a tone. A day when everything ran wrong, a fence section down, 2 calves in the wrong pasture, the pump on the east tank losing prime, and I came in at supper short-tempered and said something about the bread being heavy, which was untrue and which I knew was untrue when I said it. Clara looked at me. "It isn't heavy," she said. "It's heavier than last week." "You're angry about the fence," she said, "and the pump, and probably something I don't know about. The bread is the same as last week." She wasn't wrong. That made it worse. I pushed back from the table. Eli sat very still the way he did when the air changed, watching us both. I don't need to be told what I'm angry about, I said. Then don't say things about the bread that aren't true, she said, and went on eating. After that, it accumulated the way things do when there isn't a real argument, not one clear fight, just a buildup of small distances. I'd answer short. She'd answer efficient. There'd be nothing you could point to and say, that's the thing, that's where it went wrong, but it was going wrong and we both knew it and neither of us wanted to be the first to name it. In August, she wrote to her brothers in Cincinnati. I didn't read the letter. I wouldn't. But I saw her writing it, 3 pages, and I saw her face while she wrote, which was a face I hadn't seen her wear before, something unguarded, something homesick in it, and I thought about what it would mean if she decided to leave. I thought about it, and then I stopped thinking about it and went out to the barn. She told me on a Wednesday evening, last week of August. Eli was in bed. She sat down at the kitchen table with her hands flat on the wood and told me that she'd written to her brothers and that her youngest, France, was sick, and that the eldest, Heinrich, was asking her to come back and help with him, and with the other 2 because there wasn't money for a doctor, and she was the one who knew how. She wasn't asking my permission. She was informing me of a fact. How long? I said. I don't know, she said. A month, maybe 2. I looked at the table. You can go, I said. Eli and I will manage. And that should have been it. That should have been the end of that conversation. A temporary departure. A return in the fall, practical and clean the way everything between us was practical and clean. But she looked at me for a long time and then said, I may not come back. The kitchen was very quiet. That's within the terms of the arrangement, I said. I know, she said. I'm telling you because you deserve to know. I sat with that. I didn't know what to do with the word deserve. Nobody had used that word to me in 3 years. I think I nodded. I think I said something about the weather turning and went to bed. She was leaving on a Friday. Thursday night she packed. I could hear her through the wall of the sewing room, the soft thud of things going into the trunk, the particular sound of that broken-latched carpet bag that she'd rewound with twine again, because the twine had come loose in the months of use. I lay awake. I told myself it was the operation I was thinking about, the ledger, the dairy, the hay situation which she'd solved and which would unsolved itself without her steady eye on it. I told myself that. I was up before dawn. I went out to the water trough, and I stood there with my hands in cold water, and I thought about how many mornings I'd stood at this trough, and what the days had been before she came, and what they'd become since, and I didn't let myself finish the thought because finishing it led somewhere I wasn't prepared to go. Then I heard Eli. He was on the wheel before I turned around. The coach was the regional carrier that stopped at our gate twice a week, and Clara had arranged it, and the driver, a man named Pollard whom I'd known for years, was sitting up on the box looking at the sky, the way drivers look when they're ready to move but being polite about it. And Eli was on the wheel. Please stay, Mama. 4 words, and I want to be honest with you about what happened in my chest when I heard them, not the polished version of it, not the version where I say something like my heart opened. It was more like something broke. Like a piece of ice that's been sitting all winter at the center of you finally gives, and you feel it go, and you don't know if what's underneath is going to be water or just more cold. Clara stood on that iron step and looked at my boy. He looked back at her. He had his mother's eyes, Ruth's eyes, that steady hazel that didn't shift when it looked at you. He was 6 years old and he was not moving from that wheel. Eli, I said. My voice came out wrong, too rough, not soft enough. Come down from there. He didn't look at me. He looked at Clara. She stepped back down from the coach. She set her bag on the ground and she crouched down in front of him there in the dust of the gate, and she looked at him the way she always looked at him, even, direct, no padding. Why, she said. He thought about it. He had a way of thinking about things before answering, same as her actually, though I'd never said so. Because you're the mama now, he said, and you're going away. Clara was quiet for a moment. I saw something cross her face and then go still. I was going to come back, she said. But maybe not, Eli said. You told Papa maybe not. I watched her realize he'd been awake, that he'd been lying in that dark room with his door not quite shut, and he'd heard every word of it, and then he'd gotten up in the dark the next morning and he'd waited. She looked up at me then. Across Eli's head, she looked at me, and it was the first time since April that I didn't look away. I don't know what she read in my face. I know what was there, all of it. Every morning at the trough, the ledger, the bread, the way I'd watched her from the corner of the house without knowing how to cross the distance between where I was and where she was. I know I didn't say it, I still couldn't. But she looked at me and she looked back at Eli and she said, "All right." Just that, all right. Eli climbed down from the wheel. He stood in the dust with his hands at his sides and he waited to see if she meant it. Clara stood up from the crouch. She turned to Pollard up on the box and she said, "Amos, I'm sorry for the trouble. I won't be on today." Pollard nodded, easy as anything. He'd seen stranger things on this route, I expect. She reached down and picked up her bag and walked past Eli. She put her hand on his head as she passed, just briefly, the way you'd touch something you didn't want to make too much of, and she went back to the house. I stood at the gate with Eli for a while. Pollard's coach went down the road and the dust came up and settled. The magpies in the cottonwoods were going on about something. Eli looked up at me with those hazel eyes and then looked back at the house. "She's staying," he said. "She is," I said. He nodded like that settled something he'd been working out for a while, and then he went to the barn because he had a job to do and he knew it. I went inside. She was in the kitchen. She hadn't unpacked anything yet. The bag and the trunk were stacked by the back door, and she was standing at the window with her arms crossed, looking out at the garden, and she turned when she heard me come in. I should tell you I had a speech ready, something equal to the moment, something that accounted for 4 months of distance and one conversation the size of 3 pages to her brother in Cincinnati, and a boy on a wheel who'd said what I couldn't. I had nothing. "Clara," I said. She waited. "The hay situation," I said, "God help me, for winter." She blinked. "You were right about cutting the herd," I said, "and I should have said so. And the kitchen, the way you arranged it, I've gotten used to it. I couldn't tell you where anything was before." She looked at me. One corner of her mouth moved. "The bread was never heavy," I said. "I know," she said. "I know you know," I said. She uncrossed her arms. There was a long pause, and in it the house did what houses do, creaked once, somewhere in the roof, and settled. "France is sick," she said. "Heinrich can't manage alone." "I know," I said. "Write to them. Tell them to bring France here. Him and whoever needs to come. We have the room. The Dietrichs can winter here if they need to." She was still for a long time. "That's a large thing to offer," she said. "I'm offering it," I said. She looked at me. The same look she'd given me at the gate, but closer now. Nothing between us except the kitchen table and 4 months of careful distance. "Why?" she said. And there it was, the same question she'd asked Eli. Even, direct, no padding. She asked it of everyone, Clara. Asked it like the answer mattered, like she intended to hear the actual thing and not the dressed-up version of it. I put my hand on the back of the kitchen chair. The wood was worn smooth there, smooth from Ruth's years and then from Clara's, different hands but the same spot. "Because you stayed," I said. "And not for me, I know that. You stayed for him. But I've been watching you since April and I want you to stay I want you to want to stay." It came out wrong, halting, not what I'd meant exactly, though it was all true. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she walked around the kitchen table, which took about 4 steps in that kitchen, and she stood in front of me. She put her hand against the side of my face. That's all. Her palm against my jaw, a working woman's hand, the knuckles a little large, warm from the window light. She held it there and looked at me the way she looked at the ledger when the numbers finally agreed, the way she looked at Eli in the bean rows, steady, certain, already decided. I wasn't only staying for him, she said. The France situation took until October to work out. He was sicker than they'd let on in the letters, a lung condition, the kind that thrives in Cincinnati winters and needs dry air and altitude. He came out on the train with Heinrich and the middle brother, Carl, who was 17 and strong and had nowhere particular to be. The two older boys slept in the bunkhouse and France got the spare room off the kitchen, and Clara made him drink something she boiled from roots she ordered out of a catalog. And by November his color was better, and he was helping Eli feed the chickens. The Dietrich boys were workers, all three of them. Heinrich had their father's eye for joinery, and he rebuilt the south fence section that had been failing for 2 years, straight and square and solid, the way I'd never quite gotten it. Carl took to the cattle like he'd been born to it. He had a gift with animals that you can't teach, that instinct for the mood of a herd. It wasn't what I'd planned for, it was better. Clara and I moved slow into the rest of it. There wasn't a moment, one big scene where everything declared itself. It was smaller than that. A morning in late September when she came in from the garden with her arms full of squash, and I was at the stove, and I took them from her without being asked, and she looked at me and didn't say anything. But the look was everything. A night in October when France had a bad spell and we sat up with him until 3 in the morning, and somewhere around 2, she leaned against my arm and I didn't move away from it. Small things. The way a river moves, not one decision but 10,000 small surrenders to the same direction. By November she moved her things out of the sewing room. She didn't announce it. I came in one evening and the sewing room was empty and her hairbrush was on the dresser in the bedroom, and that was the end of the careful distance. I want to tell you about one specific morning. January. The kind of January this country does when it decides to make a point, 20 below. The snow so dry it squeaks. Every water source frozen to the point where you have to start an hour earlier to break ice before the cattle can drink. I was up at 4. I got the fire going and I got my layers on and I went out to start breaking ice. An hour later I came back in for coffee and she was up. She had the coffee made and breakfast going, and France was at the table with his root drink, looking better than he had since October, and Eli was sitting across from him, teaching him a card game that I suspected Eli had mostly invented. Clara handed me a cup without turning from the stove. I stood behind her and I put my hand on her shoulder, just my hand, resting there, the way a man does when he's finally in a place where he's allowed to, and she reached up and put her hand over mine for a moment. France watched this over the rim of his cup. Eli didn't look up from the cards. King takes the jack, Eli told France, unless the jack has already been to the river. France looked puzzled. Has the jack been to the river? That depends on what you did in the last hand, Eli said, with enormous authority. Clara made a sound. That sound, the short exhale, somewhere between amusement and exasperation. I stood there in my cold coat with coffee warming my hands and her hand over mine, and the stove going, and that sound she made filling the kitchen. And I thought about the man I'd been in October when I'd stood at the water trough with dripping hands and couldn't say a word. I thought about what Eli had done. 6 years old, climbing that wheel, saying the plainest, truest thing in the world because he didn't yet know enough to be afraid of it. Please stay, Mama. 4 words, and everything after. In the spring, Clara planted more garden. She drew it out on paper first, the way her father had drawn his projects, neat penciled rows with labels, beans, squash, the kitchen herbs she'd sent away for, a row of something I didn't recognize. What's that? I asked, pointing at the last row. Lavender, she said. My mother grew it. Does it do anything? She looked at me. It smells good, she said. Some things are for that. I looked at the plan. The lavender row was at the far end, along the south fence. The fence Heinrich had rebuilt, square and solid. The whole garden was bigger than last year by a third. You're planning ahead, I said. She looked up at me from the paper. Yes, she said, like that should have been obvious. Like where else would she be planning? I folded the paper back along its crease and handed it to her. She planted it all in May, her and Eli and Carl, who had decided Wyoming was his country and showed no signs of leaving. Heinrich wrote that he'd found work in Rawlins and was thinking of filing on a claim. France had stopped needing the root drink entirely. The lavender came up in August. It came up in long, straight rows along the south fence, and you could smell it from the porch on a warm evening, which was something I hadn't expected, how far the smell of it carried. I was on the porch one evening late in the summer, the light going gold and flat the way it goes in August, and Clara came out and sat beside me, and we didn't say anything for a while. She had a habit by then of sitting close. She'd done it the first time maybe in November, and she'd kept doing it. That particular nearness that is its own language, that says I am here, and I intend to keep being here without any fuss about it. I could smell the lavender from the south fence. Your mother's, I said. My mother's, she said. We sat there until the light was gone. That's the whole of it. The boy on the wheel, the woman who turned back, and the life that grew up around both of them like a fence line, rebuilt straight and square, solid in the places that had been failing for years.